What I find fascinating about the ebb and flow here, right, is that there are people like Colin who say the reason I'm One Nation is because, look, detail or not detail, overall, she's been right from what she said 30 years ago, right? Now, those people are totally unaffected by the scandal of the week, the misspeak of the moment, or even sort of the policy contradiction that can exist. Conversely, the Liberal Party says, well, look, all of those things is the reason why they can't govern, that they're not an alternative government. But inside the Liberal Party, were you able to discover people who are looking at themselves and how they need to change? Because presumably the extreme majority of people that are now backing One Nation, they would have voted for Peter Dutton at the last election.
Well, the number one among them is Angus Taylor. You know, he admits that the party's lost the trust of these people. So this is the core, as you mentioned, the absolute core here is that Pauline Hanson has been consistent for 30 years, especially on immigration, but also against net zero, also against the woke agenda and sort of economic nationalism, if you like. And so she's been like a rock. In the meantime, the coalition, they were for net zero, against net zero, against it again, a little bit a bob each way. On immigration, they got soft and opened up the floodgates a bit. And on the woke agenda, they've waxed and waned. They had their woke period through Malcolm Turnbull, of course. So this is the point, is that people have sort of seen what's happening now, housing crisis, immigration crisis, industry being shortchanged by net zero. And they've looked, hey, One Nation are saying what they've always said, and this is kind of what we need. Now, Angus Taylor and the Liberals, sure, they're changing. They've hardened up on immigration. They're now against net zero. But it's like personal relationships. It's like your boss at work. It's like everything in your life. You can break trust very easily. It takes a long time to win it back. And Angus Taylor and the coalition are going to need a lot of time to win back those voters. A lot of them have made up their mind. Nah, stuff you lot. A pox on all your houses. We're going to One Nation because they've been right on this stuff all along.
Now, last one here is that the truth is that across the whole year, even though there has been this total flip on the right, the overall number is still 55-45, which is basically exactly where it was in 2025. And that is Labor not at 76 seats, not at 80 seats, but above 90 seats. In your discussions with One Nation, I noticed you asked the question quite directly of people, what's your solution when it comes to cost of living? Well, again, the question in and around the Liberal Party is, well, what are you going to do when it comes to interest rates? Because I think until they actually have answers on those two things, yes, there's a whole bunch of people who will argue about, you know, which way is the way to get to the promised land, but they're currently 55-45 behind. They don't need to change the minds of people who already voted Conservative. They need to change the minds of people who have re-endorsed a bad government. And I think of all of the things on the right, what I feel is lacking at the moment is that conversation about economic hope.
Yep.
Did you feel that?
Oh, absolutely. But this is where it gets very, very complicated for the coalition, and it's a bit easier for One Nation because they just say, reject the major parties, have your protest vote through us. Now, the big danger, of course, is that One Nation just takes national seats or seats off the Libs, doesn't really take them off Labor. So you have the Liberals and the coalition kind of destroyed or knocked sideways, and One Nation stays in power. Because when it comes to the cost of living and interest rates, of course, the answer, and the Liberals, some of the Liberals, Jane Hume, for instance, not Jane Hume, I'm thinking of Claire Chandler in Tasmania, very upfront about this. They have to cut government spending. That's the only way to put downward pressure on interest rates. So stop this spending madness. But that means you've got to take money away from places, and the unions will go nuts and Labor will go nuts. And the other key one, of course, though, is net zero. If you get rid of this whole obsession with net zero, you can start to bring down electricity prices, and that flows through to everything from the factory down the road to the price of your milk. But again, that's long-term or medium-term economic reform. It's desperately needed, and the coalition are right to promise it, but it doesn't give you an instant ballot box hit.
I'm not asking what the answer is, but do you feel clear at the end of this process about who you think is going to end up winning the fight for the right?
I think the real answer, my instinct is that it's going to be bad for the right of politics. The coalition will do better against One Nation at the next federal election than it looks now. I think One Nation will come off, but that's crystal ball gazing in the extreme. But the real test is Victoria, right? Now, if Jess Wilson and the coalition can win the Victorian election in their own right, that will really mean that we've seen the peak of One Nation. But if they have to rely on One Nation seats to form government, then I think the surge continues for the foreseeable future.
Well, exactly. And a little sort of final point to note here, right, which is that for those studying the polls, right, when you're up around the 30 where it is right now, but if it falls to 15, well, everyone's going to say that's a disaster. That's a senator in for One Nation in every state. So
No
there
doubt.
is absolutely a
No
revolution
doubt they'll end
coming.
up there at least.
The size of it is fascinating. The debate about how it gets there, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock.
It's going to be great. Thanks, Paul.
Love you, brother. Take care. Chris Kenny. Yes, you can come in the Man Cave anytime. Just wander in, mate. Yeah.
Here is the twist nobody in Canberra wants to say out loud. One Nation is not surging because Australians suddenly fell in love with Pauline Hanson. They are surging because everyone else keeps changing their mind. On immigration, on net zero, on the so-called woke agenda, Hanson has been the same broken record for 3 decades. And strangely, in politics, being a broken record makes you look like a rock. Now, flip to the coalition. One minute they support net zero, next minute they oppose it, then they quietly flirt with it again like an ex you keep texting at midnight. Immigration policy softened, then hardened overnight once the polls got scary. Voters are not silly, they notice, and once trust cracks, it does not heal with a press release. So here comes the real gut punch. Former Liberal voters, the ones who once backed Peter Dutton without blinking, are not becoming ideological converts to One Nation. They are protest voters, essentially saying a pox on all your houses, and parking their vote somewhere that at least feels stable. But here is the catch, and it is a big one. One Nation offers plenty of outrage and zero cost of living plan. Meanwhile, the coalition actually holds real economic tools, cutting spending to ease inflation, scrapping net zero to lower energy costs. But they are selling it like a boring superannuation seminar instead of urgent relief for families staring down grocery bills. Which brings us to the real scoreboard, the Victorian election. If the coalition wins outright without needing One Nation preferences, that is the signal the right can still repair itself. If they need Hanson's numbers to scrape into government, that is the flashing red light confirming the fracture is permanent. And here's the sting in the tail. One Nation mostly steals seats from the coalition, not Labor, which means every protest vote quietly hands Labor an easier path to government. So is One Nation the problem? Not really. They are the symptom. The real disease is a coalition that cannot decide what it stands for and cannot make Australians believe better days are actually coming. Thanks so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one.